After the January 6th riots, mainstream social media rid itself of Donald Trump and thousands of other conspiracy theorists. Twitter dropped more than 70,000 accounts devoted to QAnon in a single day. The question is, does this sort of deplatforming work? Companies have exercised that power before. When Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube banned extreme right celebrities like Milo Yiannopoulos, Alex Jones, and Laura Loomer, they were forced to go to smaller platforms.
What we have found is that the audience is thinned considerably. Their revenue streams decline. So those two things are significant. The other thing that we found is a lot of them become slightly mellower in their tone and their use of language, perhaps because, in fact, they were more into it for the attention and the revenue than they were into it ideologically.
Removing influential figures from social media seems to have several effects. A 2015 study of ISIS deplatforming by the Brookings Institute found that ISIS influencers lost their followers when forced to smaller platforms, hurting their efforts to recruit or inspire extremist activity. And in the wake of the Capitol insurrection, a Signal Labs analysis found that misinformation about election fraud fell 73% on Twitter after Trump was kicked off. When major misinformation players and groups are kicked off mainstream social media, it makes it harder for them to recruit and organize. So there are clear benefits to deplatforming.
We found that it works quite well for the mainstream social media platforms. It's good for, in some sense, for their public image. It's good for their business model. But I'm not so sure that it's so good for the internet, and I'm not so sure that it's so good for society at large.
For one thing, while we know that these companies have the legal right to control what's on their platforms, there is concern about free speech limitations on the digital marketplace of ideas. Even Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey worried openly that banning Trump, quote, sets a precedent I feel is dangerous, the power an individual or corporation has over a part of the global public conversation. Another risk of deplatforming is that we wind up with an alternative universe of extremist platforms and services, a second web hidden from view.
I'm waiting to see where kind of the dust settles, so to speak, and where Trump's megaphone ends up. If he manages to end up on a mainstream platform or something like Parler, I think they will follow.
China has a separate internet, Russia in a way, Iran in a way, you know, and for the U.S. to have two of them, yeah, I find it quite striking.
And there's a fear that spending time in more obscure online echo chambers where everyone has the same beliefs can have a radicalizing effect. In a 2019 interview, Kopitanovich told us he fell into a set of white supremacist beliefs by virtue of the crowd he was with online.
Believe it or not, like one of the first reasons why I started browsing like the political board on 4chan was to look at and laugh at racist people. Like, you know, I would see them and I'd see the things that they were saying and I thought like, wow, this is really, really dumb. Look at these people. Being around so many of those people and, you know, just reading what they have to say about things, it can change your mindset in ways that you don't realize.
So which is more dangerous here? The open broadcast of extremism or a handful of people more deeply radicalized in a dark corner of the web? Maybe there's a third option. Maybe companies should build algorithms that don't just show us what's most likely to capture our attention and that group us that way.
So birds of a feather flock together. So you could optimize them for diversity.
If social media put a wider range of people together, some studies suggest it could keep the ugliest instincts of extremists in check. Here's one finding from brain scans of Al-Qaeda sympathizers as they spent time online with people who disapproved of their calls for violence.
Parts of the brain that were previously offline, that were deactivated, that are associated with deliberative reasoning and self-reflection, those parts of the brain actually came back online when they realized that their peer group disagreed with them.
So it's not that they lost their devotion to those values, but something about having your peer group disapprove of your behavior causes you to pull back on your actions a little bit.
Exactly.
Lawmakers are now looking closely at these companies. Shortly after the Capitol attack, letters from members of Congress to the heads of Facebook, Google, YouTube, and Twitter asked for a change to their algorithms. The letter to Mark Zuckerberg complained that, quote, Facebook, like other social media platforms, sorts and presents information to users by feeding them the content most likely to reinforce their existing political biases. Maybe we just need a bit more fact-checking. All the platforms instituted a labeling policy around election misinformation, and Twitter has a new feature called Birdwatch that allows Wikipedia-style moderation, where trusted users weigh in on what's true or false. Perhaps Europe could be a model. There, the laws that regulate tech companies are much stricter.
I think it's entirely legitimate that democratic processes bring forward checks and balances on these companies, and the narrative needs to change from that being an attack on the companies to it being a protection of the people.
The question is, who will step up to change social media? The industry? The courts? The government? Whatever the answer, social media companies may be about to change.
They determine what we know. They have a huge influence on the information that we consume and the conversations we have and the people we meet. And so it can't simply be a free-for-all, I think, going forward.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.